All right, Melissa. Well, it's so great to see you. Thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Today's topic is preventable health risks, and you have so much to say about this. I can't wait to hear more about it. But before we get into that meaty topic, share with us your journey into early care and education and why this is so important to you.
I guess I can talk about it from two different angles. From a personal standpoint, I was fortunate to have access to very high quality childcare, which I know a lot of people don't have. And it basically allowed my whole family to thrive. Just having that there, it's so important. It brought us stability so that I could go to work every day, knowing that my son was cared for by these amazing professionals who were so patient and skilled with what they did, and I never had to worry about it. So they made a huge impact on our whole family for the 5 years my son was in childcare before he started kindergarten. And then from a career standpoint, a professional standpoint, for me, I got a peek into the industry in a very different way when COVID-19 happened. Um, so the reason is my company makes an appliance that allows you to make a disinfectant on your countertop from salt, water, and vinegar. So, of course, during the pandemic, daycares were sort of the backbone that allowed people to go to work when if their companies were still operating. So, and they have to disinfect all the time. This was not new to childcare centers. They've always been all over, sanitizing and disinfecting and keeping kids and teachers safe from germs. So we started working with a lot of daycare centers during the pandemic to make sure that they had what they needed to keep their doors open so that everybody else could go back to work. So they had a lot of things to worry about. This was one less thing. So I got to know a lot of them and got a lot of very interesting feedback about the product. And we actually took that feedback and developed an additional product. So it was a very different experience with the childcare industry than my personal one, but it was rewarding on the professional standpoint too.
Amazing. So, I mean, this is actually what I would consider a benefit of what came out of COVID. Some of what your research showed, what you learned, those experiences in talking with owners of programs. So let's first start with looking at the latest research that shows the health risks of cleaning products. Tell us about that.
It was interesting. One of the things that COVID did was it made people much more aware of what was being used around them.
Yes.
Um, and very concerned about it. So we did some research that said that 91% of people don't believe that the disinfectants used around kids are safe enough. So that's a huge proportion of people. And I'm sure if you had asked that question before the pandemic, the number would have been a lot lower because it just wasn't as top of mind. And those people who have those concerns are right. There's a lot of new research that's come out in the last few years that shows that the chemicals that we're using most frequently in cleaning products are exposing us to health risks that no one really thought about before. So people readily know that there are safety risks, right? Like you don't want to ingest it and you want to wipe your surface down and rinse it and keep it away from your kids, all of that stuff. But from a health standpoint, especially a long-term exposure standpoint, some of the research has been really, really shocking. So there was one study, and all of these studies that I'll mention are thousands of people. And so they're not tiny little studies, like these are big fundamental studies. And one of them in particular looked at the most common cleaning chemicals that people are exposed to. And I can tell you what those are, but in general, their cleaning products are in everybody's cabinet. So when you look at over the long-term chronic exposure to those, people who are exposed for years and years, the lung damage is equivalent to the same as smoking a pack a day. So that's incredible to me from a respiratory standpoint that it can have that much of a difference. But if you think
Wow.
about it, on most bottles, and people don't read the instructions, but it says wear a mask when you use this. And that's really why they're very, very hard on the lungs. There was another study that was also very large, thousands of people, and it said that chronic exposure over the long term can increase your risk of COPD up to 45%. So that's another huge, to me, a very staggering fact about the lung
Mm.
impact, and that's on adults. So I think, okay, well, what about children? Our lungs are already developed. Kids are, pound for pound, because they're smaller, they're just eating, drinking, breathing in more pound per pound than we are as adults. So it's got to be much more fundamental. I have never seen research on that, but it's got to be staggering. We do know that exposure to toxic cleaning chemicals is one of the number one causes of asthma and allergies in children. And that there was another study that showed that kids at a young age exposed to cleaning products on a regular basis were up to 50% more likely to have asthma. So there's a lot out there in terms of what this is doing from a lung standpoint. And, there are reasons for that. You might be wondering, how can that possibly be? And I could tell you about some of those reasons, but that's the research out there now.
So not just lungs, you make me think also about how that impedes learning. And I suppose we could go down that path as well. But I mean, developmentally, if you're suffering with asthma or you have other, pulmonary issues, that's probably a contributing factor to learning. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think that is the case, and there is also some research out there on one of the three ingredients I mentioned. That's kind of the three ingredients to really look out for, and I can talk you through why. It's bleach, which is not shocking to anyone, I'm sure. Quaternary ammonium compounds, otherwise known as quats, and then fragrances. Quats, though, quats have been associated with problems with language development and motor skills. There's also some other stuff that is so some research on birth defects and decreased fertility. Those were animal studies on quats, but there are lots of issues beyond just the respiratory ones that absolutely impact kids for a very long time, if not their whole lives. And it's really, what the reason is, manufacturers don't have to assess the health impact of their products before they launch them. They don't have to assess it over time. Believe me, nobody else, no, you're never going to find a manufacturer who is looking at the health impacts of chronic exposure to a product. And nobody is looking at what happens when you layer this product on top of that one, on top of that one.
Oh.
So, you're using your glass cleaners and your air fresheners and your sanitizers, like all of that together. It's something like 40% of US children and 30% of US adults have asthma or allergies, which is a staggering number, right? And they
That's
should
true.
not be around any of these products. So anyway, there are loopholes in regulation that have allowed us to get here. Like if you look at a ingredient bottle, there'll be
Yes.
the word fragrance, one word. That is not one ingredient. It's actually a cocktail of, it could be hundreds of ingredients, including phthalates, which we can talk about. But there's a lot of odd regulatory gaps that have caused us to get to this point.
Well, I have several questions here. Let's just start first with, so for the audience that's not familiar with Quats, say again what that is and how it's spelled, and is it identifiable on a bottle as a for example?
Those are the money questions. You are absolutely right. So, Quats is a shorthand for, they're called quaternary ammonium compounds.
Okay.
They are So there are lots of different ones, and they're actually great at killing microbes. That's why they're so ubiquitous. They're really, really good. You pick up a wipe, disinfectant wipe or sanitizing wipe,
Yeah.
it's most likely got quats in it. They're very good at killing germs. However, they're associated with lots of nasty health issues like decreased lung function and all sorts of things. But back to your question on how do you watch out for them? Because they go under so many different names, the easiest thing to do is you want to avoid a product if it has an ingredient that ends in ammonium chloride. That
Okay.
will take care of a lot of them. These are multi-syllabic words that stand in front of ammonium chloride, as you might imagine. Um, there's another one called benzalkonium chloride. So anyway, it's tough, but if you can avoid those buckets, that's probably a help there. Another thing about clots that people don't know is that um, it takes a very long time for that residue to go away.
I was just going to ask
So
that. How long? What's
yes,
the residual effect?
yeah. So and they've and because of that too, they're they're a big problem with my antimicrobial or resistant bacteria. So the
Mm.
longer it stays there, the more you have that problem. So anyway, I always say don't use that stuff at all on any food contact surfaces, just because that residue lingers for so long. So that's quats, and again, they're really really difficult to avoid because they're on most of the products. They're in wipes, they're in spray solutions. You'll see them in hospitals and the big jugs, like they're all over the place.
Yeah. Amazing. And then there's also this concept of hormone disruptors. Tell us about that. I need an education. Give me the 101.
Okay, so the biggest source of those, so essentially, what it means is that they mimic in the body the action of your hormone system. And because of that, they cause a lot of issues. So they're linked to reproductive toxicity, things like reduced testosterone levels, low sperm motility, things like that. So hormone disruptor, a big one that you can probably avoid is it's called phthalates, and it's basically a class of chemicals that are added to fragrances in order to make the scent last. They're also in plastics. It's a plasticizer. They're used in tons of different things. They've been regulated out of a lot of children's toy products, for example, plastic toys, but they are still in rampant in fragrances because they are very good at making the scent last. So back to that ingredient bottle that you look at, whether it's your baby shampoo or it's your laundry detergent or your cleaning product, you're not going to see the word phthalates on there. You're going to see that one word fragrance. But absolutely, those products can and do contain phthalates. So in my home, we don't use anything with fragrances, which is not easy because a lot of categories, it's very hard to find products without fragrances. Um, but we don't. And I hear from my son all the time, Mom, why can't our laundry smell like so and so's laundry? I'm like, it smells clean. That's all you need to worry about.
Oh, it's so funny you should say that. My daughter had the same thing. Like, I want my towels to smell good, but smelling good doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you. And trying to recognize that there's a difference between something that smells clean and is clean. The fragrance doesn't mean it's clean, especially if you're
You got it.
incorporating all of these other elements into your health. And that we all need to, like, our eyes should be wide open about this. When it comes to, I'm thinking rapidly here on the fly, but when I think about the cleaning protocols of the CDC and health organizations, have you tell me what that looks like, and how do we advocate with these organizations about these very things that you're talking about? Because I feel like some of these protocols that come from the CDC and licensing bodies um, kind of are cockeyed to exactly the conversation we're having today.
You are exactly right. That is a very common challenge. So you have, for example, even the CDC says on their site they don't recommend that people use fragranced products around people with asthma or allergies. Same with quats. Um, most people aren't looking for that information. If you've got severe allergies or asthma, you probably know that and you struggle with finding the right products. But yeah, so it is very difficult. And in some places in the US, you daycare centers are required to use bleach diluted with water.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's that is absolutely a challenge. And so we try our best to educate people on, there are a lot of people out there doing great work, like the research I cited, and other people really helping to get the word out. And it's hard because we've all been trained for a really long time that to your point, if it smells like pine or lemon or lavender, what have you, it's clean. And that's not really the case. We've all been trained that the only thing that kills germs is bleach. There are a lot of these things out there that we all grew up with, and it's really hard to find out otherwise. So back to your question, it is a challenge for sure, and some centers just don't have the option to use something else because they're worried about the inspector coming and saying like, well, where's your bleach?
Right. Right. Well, and having you here as a guest is really helping to educate. I'm gaining so much from this. So thinking about our wider audience, what are some things that we can do today? What would you advise for people, like small changes that have a bigger long-term impact, whether it's at home or in your program? If you're a childcare owner, what would you recommend?
So the first one, I'm sorry, is controversial, but please try to ditch the fragrances. I know
Okay.
it's very hard, but even like finding unfragranced deodorant for me was really hard to find that one that worked. And then I thought, so anyway, another one that was really hard was dishwashing detergent. Like there's some categories where you just can't find it. So anyway, if you can possibly skip the fragrances, please do. Another one is when it comes to cleaning in particular, people just don't realize when they say wear a mask and gloves, you really should do it. So back to that whole chronic exposure being linked to, having the same impact on your lungs as smoking a pack a day, like that's real. So, wear the protective gear that they tell you that you should on the back of the bottle. Um, and then the other thing, I guess, just related to cleaning also is don't use a quartz-based disinfectant on anything close to a food contact surface. So those are
Mhm.
kind of like the big things. I know that they're not easy, but those would probably make a big difference.
And you also just made me think about not just in early education, but many industries, even in our home, the degradation of your surfaces, like if it's wood or plastic, a leather or a vinyl, some of these cleaning surfaces, I imagine it breaks down those natural compounds. Tell me about that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are some that you really shouldn't be using, bleach, of course, but you shouldn't be using quat-based cleaner. Or a lot of cleaning products have ammonia in them, and ammonia is really hard on a lot of surfaces. So, anything like any sort of vinyl type of surface. You can't use it on. It's going to just chew it right up pretty quickly. So yes, and then you have things like in childcare centers, you have like the the rubber mats that the kids sit on or
Yeah.
rugs and stuff like that. Yeah, so you can't, of course, use bleach on those types of surfaces. So yeah, there's some tricky stuff when it comes to the different surfaces you can use things on too.
Right. So the first thing I'm going to do when I go home is open up my cupboard. I'll be looking at those labels. Tell my husband that, well, I won't name products, but stop using this or stop using. I mean, just because, like you say, the fragrances, there's certain things that he likes to use, whether it's in the home or, part even cleaning cars, whatever it happens to be. Some of those fragrances are probably not the greatest for us. Let's just put it
Yeah,
that way.
you're right. And another one is the the dyes that go into the product. So when you look at the bottles, some are blue, some are green, some are lavender, what have you. Those aren't doing anything from an
They
efficacy
actually
standpoint. Of
promote it.
course.
Some of
What
those
was that?
products, some of those products actually promote the color in. So we both know what we're talking about. This isn't a for or against, but
Yes.
those, what you're saying is those dyes are not contributing to the effectiveness of the product, but it helps
Yes.
sell.
Exactly, exactly. So it's hard, we've all used these products for years and we just have ingrained in our minds how they should be. So the whole education piece is just it's so important. But anyway, so you'll go to town on your cabinet.
And my fragrances, it'll be the first thing. And my youngest daughter to say, just because it smells good doesn't mean it's clean or good for you. So
There you go.
we'll have some further education on that. Well, this has been great. I want to also ask, as we kind of look at what's coming over the next year or whatever the horizon is, what do you think some of the biggest challenges are, not only for our industry, but related to this industry, along these lines of what we've just been talking about, is our cleaning products, what's in the what's the long-term impact for us? So what do you think those biggest challenges are?
It seems like in so many places, families just can't find affordable, high quality childcare. And I think it's very tough to start and run a child care center. I think it's really tough to hire people and
Mm.
pay them compensation that reflects the importance of the job that they do. It's a profession that has such a huge impact on a child's social development, cognitive development, and I think the low compensation is driving really great, amazing people out of the workforce in droves. And I don't know what the answer is, but to me, that seems like just, a huge, huge challenge to be solved.
Yeah. Related to that, I'm hearing more and more, and I'm a big advocate of working with major corporations to subsidize and provide a benefit of care through, a large organization. Not all organizations can do that, but have you bumped into that as well, where they're getting more creative about what employee benefits look like in corporate packages?
So yes, I think a bit here and there. I think the corporations seem to have the the wherewithal and the budgets to be able to tackle the issue. I think for, outside of them, it's very, very tough. And I've met some interesting people along the way through my company who are trying to figure out different ways of solving the problem, different ways of allowing daycares to be able to fill up more of their downtime with more students with after school activities, maybe from elementary school, or, maybe they provide after school programming at elementary school. So just sort of different revenue streams, which I think is brilliant. I think it's a challenge. It's such a huge challenge. I wish I knew the answer. So, in my very small way, I'm trying to, help keep the amazing childcare professionals who keep our kids safe every day, help to keep them healthier too. I wish I could do more. It's just, it's a big seismic shift that we're in the midst of right now.
Well, and you're educating us so that we can be a voice with the advocacy groups and to maybe change some of what the standards are. Just because they were good for the last 50 years doesn't mean they're good for us and the environment now. So I think that our audience is going to really come away with some eye-opening conversation starters with their local childcare associations, the National Childcare Association, the licensing bodies. There's a lot of education that can go into this, and there's work out there, I'm sure, already, but you're helping to bring a voice. So keep up the good work that you're doing with that. I appreciate it.
It's been interesting. One of the things that I have learned from talking to bigger companies working on this is they seem to be much more interested in the environmental
Mhm.
benefit than the healthcare aspect of it. So we're carbon neutral, for example. You can get the conversation going pretty quickly when you say that versus,
Yes.
educating them about the health impacts. I don't know, it's harder. It's definitely harder.
No, that's excellent point. So as we wrap up here, I'd love to learn a bit more about a personal motto or favorite quote that you live by. Tell us about that.
Okay, so what I my tool when I am frustrated with something, and this is my mantra, is I try to reframe it in terms and ask, how lucky am I to get to fill in the
Mm,
blank? So, and it's helpful. It really,
it
it's
really
very
is.
simple, but it's
I
really
get
helpful.
to, but sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. How lucky am I to get to do laundry of my son's stinky socks yet again? You know, how lucky am I to sit through this 2 hour meeting on that or whatever? But it helps. It's like it forces you to think of it from a different standpoint. So that's my mantra.
That resonates with me. Instead of I have to, it's I get to. And
Yes, so same. Yes.
it's that mindset shift of I get to, and a lot of these things that we might think we have to do are actually a privilege. And as soon as you kind of shift that mind, like you were saying, it's I get to.
Yep. Yep.
Oh,
Totally.
wonderful, Melissa. This is one of many conversations. I'm sure we so appreciate you coming on for this episode. I think everyone's going to take away, preventable health risks, things that they can do today and to be more mindful of and to keep the conversation going. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you again.
Thank you so much for having me.